Hey everyone, it's been quite a while, and I just thought it was probably time to make a new video. So, I've been wanting to talk about this new show from Japan that's full of monsters, a lot of laughs, and one hell of a soundtrack. Kaiju number 8 is a shonen anime series from Production IG, and it's based on a manga created by writer and artist Naoya Matsumoto. Even though I haven't read the manga yet, I usually prefer to go into these shows blindly because then it feels more new and fresh when I watch them. And also, I normally don't go in for the hype with shows like this. But you know what? I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. The story takes place in a world where kaiju are like natural disasters around the world, and Japan is sort of like the epicenter. So the problem is left up to a special military called the Anti-Kaiju Defense Force, very reminiscent of the super soldiers from Godzilla Final Wars. The main character is a guy named Kafka who is a member of a cleanup crew, but after surviving a near-death encounter, he is given the opportunity to join the defense force. The only problem is that Kafka ends up ingesting a strange parasite kaiju, and as a result, he becomes Kaiju number 8. It's honestly a real neat design for a monster, this skull-faced humanoid dragon thing. Oh, and he pees from his nipples. He pees from his nipples. He learns that he can transform at will, and so he uses his powers to help the defense force. However, he struggles to keep his powers a secret out of fear that they'll try to kill him for being a kaiju. So it mixes a lot of elements of both kaiju and tokusatsu storytelling, but I think what it really does well at is mixing both comedy and horror. Like, there's definitely a lot of creepy and disturbing moments, but there's also a number of times where this show made me laugh. And I think that's one of the show's greatest strengths, is that the laughs and the scares are even-handed. And something else that I really appreciate is that the drama does not feel too forced. It does well at making you care about what happens to the main characters. They all have a shared goal in mind to prove that they can be part of this defense force. Some of them start off as rivals only to become friends along the way. Each of them have their own personal flaws that they need to overcome, and some viewers might even find them relatable. At times I thought some of the characters would get annoying after a while, but as the show kept going, they all sorta grew on me. And not to mention, this show has a great cast of voice actors. I watched both the Japanese and English versions for comparison, and I actually think both of the casts did a good job at portraying each of the characters. Now, I think they both had their problems, but they also had their merits as well. I think Kafka's Japanese voice actor Musaya Fukunishi was more convincing than his English voice actor Nazi Tarsha. I don't have anything against Tarsha, but his voice changes a lot. It's almost like he couldn't decide how he wanted the character to sound. This is a problem that I often have with simuldubbing, because they're usually very rushed and there's not enough time for the voice actors to fully get into character. And this is a perfect example of that because his voice is so inconsistent. Sometimes it's like he's trying to growl his vocals and sound really edgy, but then other times it's like he's trying to do a silly nasally voice. I wouldn't say he's horrible, I would like to see him improve, so hopefully before season 2 comes out he can have more time to develop his performance as the character. In contrast though, I thought Ben Stegmaier, the English voice for the loudmouth tough guy Haru, did a better job than Yuki Shin did. I just think Shin's deliveries were way too monotone, which is nothing like how the character is portrayed. I'm not saying that Stegmaier is perfect, but at least he gives some life to the character. I love it when he yells "get wrecked." Yes, that's an actual line in the dub. The villain of the show, Kaiju number 9, is actually real scary. It's sort of like a kaiju version of John Carpenter's The Thing. A parasitic body snatcher, voiced by Hiroyuki Yoshino in the Japanese version and Alejandro Saab in the English version. Both of them did fantastic at making the character sound evil and scary. So I can't really say which of the casts I thought was better because I think they both brought something different to the table. The problem with the English version is not necessarily the voices, it's mostly just the sound editing. Something really strange that I noticed is that there are times where the audio of their voices are cut up into fragments just so they can match the mouth movements. Like, there's one scene where the characters are watching the news, and the recording of the news anchor's voice just randomly cuts off mid-sentence when his mouth isn't moving, and it's just the weirdest thing. Another problem is that there are times where the characters talk without moving their mouths, and whenever that happens, it's hard to tell if they're having an inner monologue or if they're talking to somebody. Aside from those criticisms, I thought both versions were pretty solid. But I suppose if I have any major complaints with a show, it would have to be the constant recapping. And I don't mean every episode starts with a recap, I mean there's parts of the show where characters explain everything that happened in the last few episodes. It made some parts feel a bit slow and long-winded. This is especially a problem with episodes 2 and 3. There's a lot of setup, and I just think those 2 episodes would have moved at a faster pace if they'd been cut down into one. So it does get a little carried away with its build-up, but there's also a lot of payoff. There's plenty of action scenes loaded with tension, lots of blood, and the end of each episode feels rewarding. The final fight of the show was especially brutal. Each episode takes you down a strange path of unexpected turns. Sometimes you're led to think one thing is going to happen, but instead something completely different happens. If there's one thing that I think the show is missing, though, it's more of those little moments. Like, for instance, one of my favorite scenes was during episode 8, when all of the characters are just sitting around getting drunk and arguing with each other. I just enjoy little moments like that, and I wish there could have been more of those. Now, as for the animation, I've heard a lot of different opinions. A personal problem that I often have with modern anime is that I think a lot of them use way too much CGI. And yeah, even though Kaiju number 8 does have a lot of CGI, at the same time though, you also have this beautiful hand-drawn animation which evens things out. The animators did their best to make everybody look really bouncy and expressive, and I think it works. There's a lot of chibis for any chibi lovers out there. And then you also have these really fast pan and zoom techniques with the defense force jumping around the city shooting lasers at monsters, and to be fair, even the CGI is not that bad. Most of the kaiju are sort of like a mix between CG and hand-drawn animation. I love all of the different designs, like the giant salamander looking one, and then there's that giant spider with the zombie head, which I thought looked really creepy. The best CG though is in the intro. The intro is very gloomy and ominous, but at the same time it's also colorful and flashy, and it helps set the mood for each episode. But now let's talk about the soundtrack. The entire show has such a strange variety in music. I love the hard rock that plays during fight scenes. There's also some trip hop in a few parts, drum and bass. Sometimes it sounds like Pirates of the Caribbean. The soundtrack is just so out there. Every single piece of music has a rhythm to it. I really like that one song that plays whenever Kafka transforms. The song is called Never Break Down by Yuta Bando and Leo Imai. I hope I'm saying those names right. I mean, I found myself bobbing my head to this music. It was great. And I even thought the song that plays during the end credits by One Republic was also catchy. I know it sounds like I'm making a big deal about the music, but I always feel like a lot of recent anime soundtracks are just hit or miss for me. But this actually feels like it's trying to sorta be its own thing. The soundtrack is definitely one of the highlights of the show. So overall, Kaiju number 8 really took me by surprise. It might have some slow parts, but the action, the animation, the comedy, the characters, and the music all made up for it in the end. And it left the door open for a second season, which has already been confirmed. You know, it always seems like a lot of anime series don't get second seasons, but this show definitely earned it. My rating for Kaiju number 8 is a 9 out of 10. And now that I've made it this far without making a Kafka-esque joke, I think that'll be all for this video. Thank you for watching, I'll see you all next time.